Welcome to Zoom in, Zoom out. I'm Lery Hiciano. Across the Indo-Pacific, things are changing rapidly, and the region has no clear leader. China is taking a more hardline militaristic stance, clashing with its neighbors over disputed waters, expanding its nuclear arsenal, and threatening Taiwan with near constant gray zone harassment, actions that could escalate into something more. So what can Taiwan and the United States do to manage these risks, economically, politically, and militarily? To dig into that more, we're speaking with Eyck Freymann, author of Defending Taiwan. Eyck, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Since you completed the book in 2025, is there anything that has happened since that has changed your perspective or prediction for the future?
The Trump administration has pursued a very different approach to China as the Biden administration or even Trump 1. And I think you can date that change of approach not to January of 2025, but to April, Liberation Day, where we essentially rolled the dice on a rapid decoupling from China with tariffs of over 100%. And then it didn't work. And since then, the administration has been treating China very differently, aiming for a deal. And at the same time, it has strained relations with allies. It's gotten the United States into a war in the Middle East. And it's taken a number of other steps that make the allied cooperation that I talk about in the book harder to visualize. But I don't think that the last year of the Trump administration has invalidated the core claims of the book. In fact, I think it's confirmed them. It seems clearer than ever that the most likely crisis scenario is in the gray zone. It's not a bolt from the blue amphibious invasion.
With the conflict going on in the Middle East, what lessons do you think Taiwan can gain from that?
I think the lesson China is drawing is that the United States has some godlike military capabilities in cyber, in electronic warfare, in air defense, as long as we've got air defense interceptors left, in special forces, in air-to-air refueling. That's not a military that China wants to fight. But the United States also revealed that it went into the war without a plan for the economic consequences, that when those consequences arrived, it tried to push them onto allies. So I think the lesson that America's Asian partners are drawing is they need to increase their own economic resilience to withstand the pressure that may be coming. And that starts with stockpiles, but it also involves more economic security cooperation. And if they can't do it with the United States, then with one another.
In your book, you say the US is trying to reassure its allies that it can still lead the liberal economic order. But under the Trump administration, how do those long-term strategies square with domestic politics and voter priorities?
In the United States, the only way to approach this issue responsibly is to recognize the United States has such important interests at stake here. This has to be above politics. It cannot be allowed to become a partisan issue. The international order that has been established since the end of the Cold War is dying. Americans, and not just Americans, the people, voting citizens and American allies don't feel like it's working for them. They feel like the shape of how the world is going doesn't reflect their interests and values. And I think a crisis or a conflict over Taiwan would bring that order crashing down. And the question that the United States and its partners would face then is, what kind of a world do we want to live in? And more importantly, the United States has to communicate to China that while it does have options of extreme punishment and extreme response if China moves against Taiwan, that kind of crisis might also galvanize the United States to discover in itself the ability to pursue a different kind of world order, and may force the question of how the United States will work with its allies.
You coined the term structured ambiguity in the book. How does that differ from existing US policy towards Taiwan?
The basic idea of structured ambiguity is that the United States policy towards China and Taiwan shouldn't change, but the way that it's communicated probably should. Strategic ambiguity is a great deterrent when you're much, much, much stronger than the other side. As the power balance starts to narrow, it starts to look a bit like a get out of jail free card. Don't ask me what I'd do. Only in the event will you find out what I'd do. And it seems to be an open door, an invitation for China to push in the gray zone, to see how much it can change the facts on the ground incrementally. And if America doesn't respond, well, why not keep pushing? And structured ambiguity says, yes, we are ambiguous, but we're ambiguous for a reason, and the ambiguity is not unlimited. We will push back against your gray zone tactics in a way that we think is proportional. If you communicate those things to China, it makes clear that squeezing Taiwan in the gray zone is not a cost-free proposition. And that's the only way to maintain some kind of equilibrium in the Taiwan Strait under Xi Jinping.
In the latter half of the book, when you talk about the economic consequences of a potential war, you suggest creating a new organization called the Economic Security Cooperation Board. Can you talk a little bit more about those core recommendations?
The fundamental problem the United States faces when it tries to improve its economic security over China is that we live in an integrated global economy. You can decouple from China in a product, you can put a high tariff on China in a product, and that's all well and good. But if China is selling that thing to Vietnam, to Brazil, and somewhere along the way it gets labeled made somewhere else, then you're not actually breaking your dependence on China. You're just losing track of what those dependencies are. The idea of an Economic Security Cooperation Board is this is not a new World Trade Organization. This is not a new multilateral that would have power over the United States. It's just a coordination forum. It's a place to get together and exchange information on what supply chains actually look like. But the book argues that if we have a crisis over Taiwan, if, God forbid, we have a conflict and we need to break these dependencies as a matter of urgency, this kind of format is the only way that we can take control of our supply chains.
You recommend the US continue engagement with both the Kuomintang and the Democratic Progressive Party rather than picking sides. How do you see that approach holding up in practice, given the current political deadlock over Taiwan's defense budget and broader polarization in both Taiwan and the US?
We, at least as Americans, because I'm speaking mainly to my own country, we have common interests here, Democrat or Republican. None of us want a devastating war with China, and none of us want to give up the honorable peace in this region upon which America's national security and future prosperity depend. If the United States can rediscover more confident bipartisan consensus on this issue, we can offer a very different and much more robust set of assurances to Taiwan and to our regional partners. I think China will not be at risk of getting the wrong idea. In the Trump administration's defense, they have an approach to diplomacy that says, well, the more you negotiate, the less likely you are to have conflict. The KMT has that position too. And you may disagree with the Trump administration's policies and the KMT's policies, but you can also acknowledge that that's not a completely illegitimate approach at a time when we want to prevent war. The people of Taiwan have to make their own decisions, and I'm not a Taiwanese. All that I can say is the American people and American policymakers ought to understand that the KMT and the DPP and other political parties in Taiwan have different ideas of what Taiwan is, what one China is, what the island's future ought to be, and the United States can't make those choices for Taiwan. We can only support Taiwan as it makes its own choices, and we can learn more about Taiwan's democracy so that we can send messages of encouragement and support that have the intended effect.
When you were writing the book, how did you cut through competing pro-China, anti-China, pro-US, anti-US narratives? And how did that shape how you developed your recommendations?
To be open to being proven wrong and to look for the answer and ask the hard questions, you have to apply the same approach to your adversaries. Then you have a picture about how all of the different actors in the situation see the world. But you have to be willing and able to crawl inside the head of someone who you aren't inclined to agree with, or else you're just drawing cartoons. And I think so much of what we do, what passes for China analysis these days, is drawing cartoons. But if you want to know what Xi Jinping thinks, it's not that hard. Just listen to his speeches. Read what he says, read what he's written. It's a worldview. You don't have to agree with it, but we should all want to understand it.
Some in Taiwan are skeptical of US support and that ultimately Taiwan would be the one to bear the brunt of the conflict if it were to break out. They point to ideas like Admiral Paparo's hellscape strategy for the Taiwan Strait or how there was a Bloomberg report that US forces might blow up TSMC rather than let it fall into Chinese hands. But how do you think statements like this impact how Taiwanese people feel about a potential conflict or about Taiwan-US relations?
I don't think that the United States should be boasting about the ability to destroy Taiwan's fabs. And what I point out in the book is that this would be an absolutely disastrous thing for the United States. What happens if deterrence fails and the United States doesn't want to seek a policy of maximal chaos and destruction? What if the policy we want is to soften or cushion the blow to the global economy, to build a different kind of coalition, to pursue an economic security agenda in a more gradual way that doesn't break all the supply chains? That's a strategy that I call avalanche decoupling. The United States has to have respect and empathy for people on Taiwan who are just trying to live their lives, who don't want to see any of these scenarios come to pass. Taiwan is a vulnerable democracy. It's under threat from an authoritarian regime that wants to extinguish it. And the people of Taiwan have to be able to bear that pressure, or the United States can't help them. But the US can offer reassurances, and it can issue its threats in a more respectful and careful way. I think Admiral Paparo, when he made his comments about hellscape, he made that in a very careful and measured way.
Trump is known for making deals, and some have speculated that Taiwan could factor into a broader understanding with Xi during his upcoming visit to Beijing. Do you think an agreement like this would ease tensions or risk encouraging further pressure in the Taiwan Strait?
And the risk is, I think, not that China invades Taiwan. It's that China uses one of these coercive lawfare maneuvers to seize control of who and what comes and goes, not actually breaking any of the supply chains, but claiming as a matter of law, as a matter of norms and regulations, that if you're a UPS or FedEx or someone coming in or out of Taiwan, that you first clear customs at a mainland port. And if that precedent gets established, well, I think Taiwan is checkmated. I think the US is checkmated, because that is how China seizes the fabs intact. Once that precedent is established, China can just turn the dial. They can make it impossible for Americans to come in, for TSMC engineers to come out, and they can squeeze the control of the chip supply chain. So I think the United States would face a difficult choice there. China wouldn't be creating a financial crisis and a geopolitical shock. China would be pushing the burden of escalation onto Trump. And I don't know if the Trump administration really grasps that that is Xi Jinping's strategy. And that's why he thinks the time is on his side. So I'm braced for the summit, but I don't think it's going to be definitive one way or the other. I think Xi Jinping is getting ready to test Trump's nerve. More likely than not, it is in 2028. But if Trump miscalculates, it could come sooner. And then the question just becomes, does Trump have the nerve? And does his administration have the coordinating capacity to push back effectively? And on that one, your guess is as good as mine.
Thanks for speaking with us, Eyck.
Thanks so much for having me.
This has been Zoom In, Zoom Out. You can find more stories from TaiwanPlus News if you follow us on social media. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.